I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. 6 months ago, I thought I was doing the right thing by moving into my deceased parents' house to take care of it, while my siblings and I figured out what to do with our inheritance. I paid every utility bill, mowed the lawn, fixed the leaky faucet, and even replanted Mom's rose garden that had been neglected since she passed. I thought my sister Jessica would appreciate that someone was maintaining our childhood home, preserving the memories, keeping everything intact for when we were ready to make decisions as a family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was wrong. Last Tuesday, I came home from a long day at the accounting firm where I work, my arms full of groceries to restock the kitchen, only to find that my key wouldn't turn in the front door lock. I stood there on the porch of 847 Maple Street, the same porch where Mom used to wait for us to come home from school, fumbling with my keys like a stranger trying to break into my own home. That's when I noticed the shiny new deadbolt that definitely hadn't been there that morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica that made my blood run cold. House goes on the market Monday. Pack your stuff. We need the money now. No explanation, no family discussion, no consideration for the 6 months I'd spent caring for the place that held 25 years of our family memories. She had simply decided, on her own, that our parents' home was nothing more than a commodity to be liquidated. But here's what Jessica didn't know about me. She didn't know that losing Mom and Dad within 6 months of each other had changed something fundamental inside me. She didn't know that I had spent countless nights in that house going through their papers, understanding their finances, learning exactly what they had built and what they had wanted for us. And she definitely didn't know that I had no intention of letting her destroy our family legacy because she couldn't manage her credit cards. Growing up in Springfield, Missouri, our family seemed like the picture of middle-class stability. Dad worked as a supervisor at the local manufacturing plant for 30 years, while Mom managed the books for a small chain of grocery stores downtown. They bought the house on Maple Street when David, my older brother, was just 3 years old, and they raised all three of us kids in those rooms that now stood locked against me. Our neighborhood, Oak Hill District, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business but minded their own. Tree-lined streets with sidewalks where we learned to ride bikes, front yards where neighbors gathered for impromptu barbecues, and backyards where kids played until the streetlights came on. Bob and Linda Mitchell were respected in that community. Dad coached Little League for 12 years, and Mom organized the annual Black Party every summer without fail. But even in our seemingly stable household, there were dynamics at play that would later fracture our family in ways I never saw coming. David, being the oldest, was the responsible one who got good grades and never caused trouble. He was the son Dad talked about with pride, the one who would inherit the family work ethic and make something of himself. Jessica, the youngest, was the creative spirit who could charm her way out of any situation. She had Mom's gift for making people laugh and Dad's stubborn determination when she wanted something. Then there was me, stuck in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy and maintain peace in a family that didn't even realize it needed a mediator. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who helped Jessica with her homework when she procrastinated, who listened to David complain about his girlfriend problems, and who helped Mom balance her workbooks when she brought them home. I didn't mind being the responsible middle child. It felt natural to me, like I was contributing something valuable to our family's stability. The cracks in our family foundation started showing when we became adults with our own lives and problems. David moved to Portland after college for a job in software development. He met a wonderful woman named Lisa, got married, and started his own family 1,000 miles away from Missouri. He came back for holidays and major events, but his real life was in Oregon. He'd call Mom and Dad every Sunday, but his daily reality was completely separate from ours. Jessica stayed in Springfield after high school, but she chose a completely different path than anyone expected. Instead of going to college like David and me, she decided to pursue her passion for art and marketing. She rented a trendy loft in the arts district downtown and threw herself into the local creative scene. She worked at various marketing agencies, sometimes thriving, sometimes struggling, but always maintaining this image of being a free-spirited creative who couldn't be tied down by conventional expectations. I took the traditional route that Mom and Dad understood and appreciated. I got my degree in accounting from Missouri State University, passed my CPA exam, and landed a steady job at Patterson and Associates, a well-respected firm in downtown Springfield. I rented a small but clean apartment near my office, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and built the kind of predictable, stable life that made my parents proud. Every Sunday, I'd drive over to Maple Street for family dinner, helping Mom with the cooking and staying late to help Dad with household projects he could never quite finish on his own. Looking back now, I can see that our family operated on an unspoken assumption that I would always be the one to step up when things got difficult. When Mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 years ago, I was the one who drove her to every chemotherapy appointment, even though Jessica was living closer to the hospital. When Dad had his first heart attack 2 years ago, I was the one who spent nights at the hospital, coordinating with doctors and making sure that someone from the family was always there. David would fly in for major crises, and Jessica would visit when her work schedule allowed it. But the daily responsibility of caring for our aging parents fell to me by default. I didn't resent it at the time. Actually, I felt honored that Mom and Dad trusted me with their medical decisions and financial concerns. Dad started showing me where he kept all the important papers, explaining their insurance policies, and even adding my name to their bank accounts so I could help with bills if needed. Mom taught me the quirks of running the household, from knowing which neighbor had a spare key to understanding the temperamental furnace in the basement. They were preparing me to be the family caretaker, though none of us said it out loud.
When Dad had died suddenly of a massive heart attack at work, it shattered our family's sense of security. He was only 62, had always been healthy, except for that one scare, and we all thought we had more time. Mom was devastated, not just emotionally, but practically. She had always relied on Dad for certain aspects of managing their lives, and suddenly she was alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. David flew in immediately for the funeral and stayed for a week to help with arrangements. Jessica took time off work and was incredibly supportive during those first awful days. But after the immediate crisis passed and life had to somehow continue, it became clear that someone needed to help Mom transition to living alone. Once again, by geography and circumstance, that someone was me. I started spending most evenings at the house on Maple Street, helping Mom with everything from grocery shopping to understanding the insurance paperwork for Dad's funeral. She was grieving so deeply that simple tasks felt overwhelming to her. I didn't mind being there, actually. It felt meaningful to be able to help during such a difficult time, and Mom seemed genuinely grateful for the support. 6 months later, when Mom's cancer returned with a vengeance, I temporarily moved back into my childhood bedroom so she wouldn't have to face the treatments alone. David visited as often as he could manage with his job and young family in Portland, but Jessica seemed to withdraw during this period. She was struggling at her marketing job, dealing with some personal relationship issues, and I think watching Mom deteriorate was more than she could emotionally handle. Mom died on a Tuesday morning in March while I was holding her hand in the hospice room at Springfield General Hospital. Her last words were asking me to take care of Jessica, to make sure David stayed connected to the family, and to remember that the house on Maple Street would always be our home base, no matter where life took us. She made me promise that we 3 kids would take care of each other the same way she and Dad had always taken care of us. After Mom's funeral, we 3 siblings sat in the kitchen of the Maple Street house, emotionally exhausted and trying to figure out what came next. The will was straightforward. Mom and Dad had left everything divided equally among the 3 of us.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The house, Dad's 1978 Chevy Camaro that he'd restored as a hobby, their savings accounts, and various personal belongings were all to be shared equally. There were no complicated stipulations or requirements, just a simple directive that their children should inherit what they had built together. David needed to get back to Portland for his job, but before he left, we had a family meeting about the house. None of us were ready to sell it immediately. The place was too full of memories, too much a part of our identity as the Mitchell family. David suggested that since I was already living there and taking care of things, I should continue doing so while we all took some time to process our grief and decide what we ultimately wanted to do. Jessica agreed to the arrangement, saying she needed time to get her own life sorted out before making major decisions about the family property. She was between jobs, dealing with some debt issues, and honestly seemed relieved that someone else was handling the responsibility of the house. I agreed to stay, pay the utilities and maintenance costs, and basically serve as the caretaker while we figured out our long-term plan. For the first few months, this arrangement worked perfectly. I found comfort in living surrounded by mom and dad's belongings, sleeping in my old room, and maintaining the routines that had made the house feel like home for decades. I kept mom's rose garden watered and blooming. I organized dad's workshop in the garage, keeping his tools clean and ready as if he might come back to finish one of his projects. I even started the old Camaro once a week to keep the engine healthy, just like dad had taught me. David would call regularly to check on how things were going with the house, and I'd send him photos of any repairs I was making or improvements to the yard. He seemed genuinely appreciative that someone was taking care of the place and preserving it the way mom and dad would have wanted. Jessica would stop by occasionally, usually to pick up some specific items she wanted or to show the house to friends who were curious about where she grew up. I thought we were all on the same page about taking our time with this major decision. The house was paid off, so there were no mortgage pressures forcing us to act quickly. The neighborhood was stable, so the property value wasn't going to fluctuate dramatically. And emotionally, I thought we all needed time to grieve before making irreversible choices about our parents' legacy. I was completely unprepared for what happened next. Over the past 6 months, I had poured my heart into maintaining every corner of that house. I'd repaired the back deck that Dad had been meaning to fix before he died. I'd painted the bathroom that Mom had always complained needed updating. I even had the old furnace serviced and upgraded to make the house more energy efficient. Every dollar I spent, every hour of labor I invested felt like a tribute to my parents and a contribution to preserving our family home. But while I was focused on preservation and maintenance, Jessica was apparently focused on liquidation and immediate cash. Later, I would learn that she had been researching real estate prices, contacting agents, and even getting preliminary appraisals without telling David or me. She had made the decision to sell the house weeks before she changed those locks, but she hadn't bothered to include her siblings in the decision-making process. The woman who stood on that porch last Tuesday afternoon staring at a lock I couldn't open was not the same person who had moved into the house 6 months earlier with the best intentions of caring for our family legacy. I had been transformed by grief, by responsibility, by the daily experience of living with my parents' memories, and by the growing realization that I was the only one of the Mitchell children who truly understood what we stood to lose if we rushed into selling the place. Jessica had no idea that changing those locks would awaken something fierce in me, something that had been building through months of solo caregiving and solitary decision-making. She thought she was dealing with the same compliant middle sister who had always prioritized family peace over personal preferences. She was about to discover that some lines, once crossed, change everything about the people you thought you knew. Standing on that porch with my useless keys, I felt the neighborhood watching me. Oak Hill District had always been the kind of place where people notice things. Mrs. Helen Garcia, who lived in the blue house next door,
Probably seen Jessica's car in the driveway earlier that day. The Hendersons across the street were likely peeking through their curtains, wondering why Sarah Mitchell was struggling with her own front door. These were the same neighbors who had brought casseroles after Dad's funeral and had stopped by to check on Mom during her treatments. Oak Hill wasn't one of those anonymous suburban developments where everyone minded their own business. This was a neighborhood with roots, where families like ours had lived for decades and where everyone knew each other's stories. The Thompsons at the end of the block had raised 4 kids in their house. The elderly couple in the yellow Victorian had celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary by hosting the whole street for a backyard party. These people had watched David, Jessica, and me grow up. They remembered us riding bikes down these sidewalks and playing in each other's yards until dark. Mom and Dad had been pillars of this community in their quiet, steady way. Dad never missed the annual neighborhood cleanup day, always showing up with his truck loaded with rakes and garbage bags, ready to tackle whatever needed doing. Mom organized the phone tree that kept everyone informed about emergencies or community events. When the city proposed changing the zoning laws that would have allowed commercial development on our street, Mom and Dad were among the most vocal opponents, attending every city council meeting until the proposal was defeated. Now here I was, their middle daughter, locked out of their house by my own sister, creating exactly the kind of neighborhood drama that Mom would have found mortifying. The Mitchell family had always prided itself on handling problems privately, on being the people others could count on rather than the people others worried about. Standing there fumbling with keys that no longer worked, I felt like I was betraying everything Mom and Dad had taught us about dignity and family loyalty. My phone rang just as I was considering whether to call a locksmith or drive to Jessica's loft downtown to confront her. The caller ID showed Amanda Chen's name, and I felt a rush of relief. Amanda had been my best friend since third grade when she moved to Springfield from California and got assigned to the desk next to mine. Over the years, she had become more like a sister to me than Jessica often seemed to be. "Sarah, are you okay?" Amanda's voice was filled with concern before I even said hello. "I just drove past your house and saw you standing on the porch looking upset." "Jessica changed the locks," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded when inside I felt like screaming. "She wants to sell the house immediately, and apparently she decided the best way to handle that was to lock me out of my own home." Amanda was quiet for a moment, processing this information. As a kindergarten teacher at Springfield Elementary, she dealt with conflict resolution every day. But family drama among adults was more complicated than playground disputes between 5-year-olds. "Where are you going to stay tonight?" she asked practically. "I have no idea," I admitted. "I suppose I could go back to my old apartment downtown, but I gave notice there 3 months ago when it became clear I'd be living here long term. My landlord was happy to get me out so he could renovate and charge higher rent." "You're staying with me," Amanda said decisively. "Pack whatever you can get from your car and come over right now. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Amanda lived in a cozy 2-bedroom house about 15 minutes away, in the Riverside district, an area popular with young professionals and teachers because of its proximity to the school district and lower cost of living. Her house was everything mine wasn't: bright, modern, filled with plants and colorful artwork from local artists. Where the Maple Street house was heavy with history and memories, Amanda's place felt light and optimistic, like a fresh start waiting to happen. That evening, sitting in Amanda's kitchen with a cup of tea and finally able to think clearly, I started to understand the full scope of what Jessica had done. This wasn't just about changing locks or even about selling the house. This was about power and control and fundamental disagreements about what our family legacy meant. "Tell me exactly what's been happening with Jessica lately," Amanda said, settling into the chair across from me with her own cup of tea. Amanda had known our family for over 20 years, had eaten countless dinners at the Maple Street house, had been like a fourth Mitchell sibling in many ways. If anyone could help me understand Jessica's mindset, it would be her. "She's been struggling financially," I began, trying to organize my thoughts. "She lost her job at that boutique marketing agency downtown about 2 months ago. Something about budget cuts, but I suspect there was more to it than that. She'd been complaining about her boss and missing deadlines, showing up late. You know how Jessica is when she's unhappy with the situation. She sabotages herself rather than just quitting." Amanda nodded. She had watched Jessica operate this way since high school, burning bridges instead of building them when things got difficult. "But I thought she was handling it okay," I continued. "She said she had some freelance projects lined up and was considering starting her own marketing consultancy. She seemed excited about the possibilities, about being her own boss finally." "What about her living situation? That loft she rents isn't cheap." "That's where things get complicated," I said, remembering conversations I hadn't paid enough attention to at the time. "She mentioned a few weeks ago that her rent was going up and she was thinking about finding a roommate or maybe moving somewhere less expensive, but she said it like it was no big deal, like she had plenty of options." As I talked, I started to see patterns I had missed while I was focused on maintaining the house and dealing with my own grief. Jessica had been dropping hints about money troubles for months, but she wrapped them in optimistic talk about new opportunities and positive changes. She'd mentioned needing to pay off some credit cards, but she'd made it sound like typical post-holiday debt that everyone accumulates, not serious financial trouble. "There's something else," I said, remembering a conversation that hadn't seemed important at the time. "About a month ago, she asked me if I thought Mom and Dad would have wanted us to hold onto the house or if they would have preferred us to sell it and invest the money in our futures." "What did you tell her?" "I said I thought they would have wanted whatever made us happiest and most secure, but now I'm wondering if she was already planning this. Maybe she was testing to see if I'd go along with selling voluntarily?" Amanda leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "So she's been struggling,
financially. Losing her job, facing higher rent, and she sees the house as the solution to all her problems. But it's not just her house, I said, feeling anger rise in my chest again. It belongs equally to David and me too. She can't just make unilateral decisions about our parents' legacy because she's having money problems. Have you talked to David about any of this? I shook my head. Jessica's text said the house goes on the market Monday. Today is Tuesday, so I have less than a week to figure out what's happening and try to stop it. I should call David tonight, but it's 3 hours later in Portland and he's probably putting his kids to bed. Call him anyway, Amanda said firmly. This is the kind of emergency that justifies interrupting bedtime routines. David answered on the second ring, and I could hear the chaos of family life in the background. His 5-year-old daughter practicing piano and his 3-year-old son protesting bedtime. Sarah, what's wrong? You never call this late unless something's happened. I explained the situation as clearly and calmly as I could, trying not to let my anger at Jessica color the facts. David listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline and Jessica's stated intentions. She can't sell the house without both of us agreeing, he said when I finished. All 3 names are on the deed, and Missouri law requires unanimous consent from all owners for major decisions like this. But she can make my life miserable by keeping me locked out of the place where I've been living for 6 months, I pointed out. And she can certainly put it on the market even if the sale can't go through without our signatures. This is so typical Jessica, David said with a sigh that carried years of frustration. She gets herself into a mess and then expects everyone else to bail her out by going along with whatever solution she's decided will fix her problems. The thing is, I understand that she needs money, I said. If she had come to us and explained the situation, asked for help, maybe we could have worked something out. I could have helped her with expenses temporarily, or we could have discussed a timeline for selling that gave everyone time to prepare. But instead, she decided to force our hand by creating a crisis. David finished. Yeah, that's definitely Jessica's style. Remember when she was in college and needed money for spring break, so she sold Dad's golf clubs to a pawn shop without asking? She figured it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission. I had forgotten about the golf club incident, but David's reminder brought back a flood of similar memories. Jessica had always been impulsive, acting first and dealing with consequences later. Usually, Mom or Dad or I would smooth things over, fix whatever damage her impulsiveness had caused, and help her avoid the worst consequences of her choices. The difference is that Mom and Dad aren't here anymore to mediate between us. And this isn't about golf clubs that can be replaced. This is about our family home, our parents' legacy, the place where we grew up. I know, David said quietly. Look, I can't fly out there immediately because Lisa is dealing with some issues at her job and I can't leave her alone with both kids right now. But I can be there by the weekend if this isn't resolved by then. What should I do in the meantime? First, document everything. Take photos of the changed locks, save Jessica's text messages, keep records of all the money you've spent maintaining the house over the past 6 months. If this turns into a legal battle, you'll need evidence of what's been happening. Legal battle? The phrase made my stomach clench. I don't want to sue my own sister. Nobody wants it to come to that, David said. But Jessica has escalated the situation beyond normal family disagreement. She's essentially holding you hostage by locking you out of property you legally own. You may need legal advice, even if you don't end up going to court. After I hung up with David, Amanda and I sat in her kitchen making lists and trying to develop a strategy. Amanda, despite being an elementary school teacher, had always been the practical one in our friendship. She was the person I called when I needed help moving furniture or figuring out insurance paperwork. She approached problems systematically, breaking them down into manageable steps. Tomorrow, you need to find a lawyer, she said, writing on a legal pad. Even if you don't end up needing to take legal action, you should understand exactly what your rights are and what Jessica can and can't do legally. I hate that it's come to this, I said. 6 months ago, we were grieving together, supporting each other through the worst time in our lives. How did we get to the point where I need a lawyer to protect myself from my own sister?
Grief affects people differently, Amanda said gently. Some people, like you, deal with loss by trying to preserve and protect what's left. Other people, like Jessica, deal with loss by trying to make dramatic changes to escape from painful reminders. But the house isn't just a painful reminder, it's also full of good memories, family history, the place where we were happiest together. To you, yes. But maybe to Jessica, staying connected to the house feels like staying trapped in grief. Maybe she thinks selling it and moving on would be healthier for all of you. I considered this possibility, trying to see the situation from Jessica's perspective. Maybe she genuinely believed that holding on to the house was preventing us from moving forward with our lives. Maybe she saw my attachment to the place as unhealthy, and her drastic action was meant to force me into making changes I needed to make anyway. But even if her motivations were partly good, her methods were completely unacceptable. Changing the locks without discussion, sending ultimatum texts instead of having conversations, making unilateral decisions about shared property. These weren't the actions of someone looking out for her family's best interests. These were the actions of someone putting her own immediate needs ahead of everything else. There's something else we need to consider, Amanda said carefully. What if Jessica is right about the practical aspects? What if holding on to the house really isn't the best financial decision for any of you? What do you mean? Well, you're 32 years old and you've been living in your childhood bedroom for 6 months. You gave up your apartment, your independence, your ability to build your own life because you felt responsible for taking care of your parents' house. Maybe Jessica is worried that you're getting stuck in the past instead of moving toward your own future. This possibility hit me like a physical blow because there was truth in it. I had put my personal life on hold to care for Mom during her final months, and I had continued putting it on hold to care for the house after her death. I hadn't dated anyone seriously since before Dad's heart attack. I hadn't pursued job opportunities that weren't a near drive from the house.
Might require relocating. I hadn't made any major decisions about my own future because I was so focused on preserving the past. But that should be my choice to make, I said. If I want to live in the house and take care of it, if that feels meaningful and important to me, Jessica shouldn't get to override that decision just because she thinks I'm making a mistake. You're absolutely right, Amanda agreed. I'm just trying to help you understand all the angles before you decide how to respond to this situation. That night, lying in Amanda's guest room, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and listening to unfamiliar sounds, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I started to drift off, I would think about my childhood bedroom sitting empty at the Maple Street house, about Mom's rose garden that would need watering tomorrow, about Dad's workshop, where I had been slowly organizing his tools as a way of feeling connected to him. I thought about the family time capsule that we had buried under the oak tree in the backyard when I was 10 years old. Mom and Dad had suggested it as a fun project during one of those endless summer afternoons when we kids were complaining about being bored. We each contributed something special. I had included a drawing I had made of our family, David had contributed a baseball card he treasured, and Jessica had written a letter to her future self about what she wanted to be when she grew up. We were supposed to dig up the time capsule when the youngest child, Jessica, turned 18. But by then, Jessica was busy with high school graduation and summer jobs, David was getting ready to leave for college, and somehow we never got around to the ceremonial unveiling. The time capsule was still buried out there, a piece of our family history that would be lost forever if the house was sold to strangers. I thought about all the Christmas mornings in the living room, birthday parties in the backyard, family dinners around the kitchen table, where we had laughed and argued and shared the ordinary moments that make up a life together. Every room in that house held memories that couldn't be replaced or recreated anywhere else. But I also thought about Amanda's observation that maybe I was getting stuck in the past instead of building toward the future. Was my attachment to the house really about honoring Mom and Dad's memory? Or was it about avoiding the scary work of figuring out what I wanted my adult life to look like? The question kept me awake most of the night, because I honestly wasn't sure I knew the answer. All I knew was that Jessica's method of forcing the issue felt deeply wrong, regardless of whether her ultimate goal might be right for our family. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since finding myself locked out of the house. I was going to fight Jessica's unilateral decision, not necessarily because I was sure about keeping the house forever, but because major family decisions should be made through discussion and mutual agreement, not through ultimatums and changed locks. Amanda had already left for school by the time I got up, but she had left coffee made and a note on the kitchen counter with the name and phone number of Patricia Rodriguez, a family law attorney who had helped one of Amanda's colleagues with an estate dispute the previous year. She specializes in inheritance issues and sibling conflicts, the note said. Amanda Chan referred you, so mention my name when you call. She's expensive, but worth it. Don't let Jessica steamroll you into making decisions you'll regret forever. I called Patricia Rodriguez's office as soon as it opened at 8 o'clock and was able to get an appointment for that afternoon. Then I drove to my office at Patterson and Associates, trying to focus on my regular work responsibilities while my personal life was falling apart. My boss, Jim Patterson, noticed that I seemed distracted during our morning meeting and asked if everything was okay. I gave him a brief overview of the situation, emphasizing that I didn't expect it to interfere with my work performance, but that I might need some flexibility for legal appointments over the next few days. Take whatever time you need, he said, immediately. Family comes first, and estate disputes can be incredibly stressful. If there's anything the firm can do to help, just let me know. Jim's support meant more to me than he probably realized. Patterson and Associates was a small firm where everyone knew each other well, and I had always felt valued there for my attention to detail and my ability to help clients navigate complex financial situations. Knowing that my professional life was stable while my personal life was in chaos gave me strength to face whatever came next. Patricia Rodriguez's law office was located in a converted Victorian house near downtown Springfield, and her manner was exactly what I needed: direct, knowledgeable, and completely unsympathetic to family drama that interfered with legal rights. After I explained the situation, she asked pointed questions about the property deed, our parents' will, and the specific actions Jessica had taken. Your sister has put herself in a legally vulnerable position, she said after reviewing the documents I had brought. She cannot change locks on property she doesn't own exclusively, regardless of her intentions. She cannot force a sale without the agreement of all owners. And if she has spent money on real estate preparations without the consent of the other owners, she may be liable for those expenses if the sale doesn't proceed. What are my options? I asked. Legally, you have several options ranging from mediation to filing for an injunction to prevent any sale from proceeding. But before we discuss legal remedies, I want to ask you something important. What do you actually want to achieve here? The question caught me off guard because I had been so focused on what Jessica was doing wrong that I hadn't clearly articulated what I wanted to happen instead. I want her to stop making unilateral decisions about our shared inheritance. I want us to have family discussions about what to do with the house, instead of her just deciding and then trying to force David and me to go along with it. And what outcome would you prefer from those family discussions? I took a deep breath, trying to be honest with myself as well as with Patricia. I think I'd like to find a way to keep the house in the family, at least for now. But I'm also open to other solutions if David and Jessica have good reasons for preferring to sell it. I just want us to make the decision together, based on what's best for all of us, not just what solves Jessica's immediate financial problems. Patricia nodded approvingly. That's a reasonable position that a mediator or a judge would likely support if this situation escalates. The law generally favors collaborative decision-making among co-owners unless there are compelling reasons why that's not possible. What would you recommend as my first step?
I'd recommend a formal letter to Jessica, copied to David, stating your position clearly and proposing a specific process for resolving this disagreement. Give her a reasonable deadline to respond and to restore your access to the property. If she doesn't respond appropriately, then we can consider more aggressive legal action. How much time should I give her? A week should be sufficient for her to recognize that you're serious about protecting your rights and to respond with either cooperation or a clear refusal to cooperate. Patricia helped me draft a letter that was firm, but not inflammatory, focused on legal facts rather than emotional accusations. The letter stated that I expected to regain access to the property immediately, that any attempts to sell the house without unanimous consent would be opposed, and that I was proposing a family meeting within 1 week to discuss options for the property's future. What if she just ignores this? I asked as I reviewed the draft. Then we file for an emergency injunction to prevent the sale, and possibly for a court order requiring her to provide you access to property you legally own. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Most people, when they realize they're in a legally indefensible position, prefer to negotiate rather than go to court. I left Patricia's office feeling more confident than I had since this crisis began. I had a plan, I had professional support, and I had legal rights that Jessica couldn't simply override with dramatic gestures and emotional manipulation. That evening, I drove to Jessica's loft in the Arts District, determined to deliver the letter in person and to make one final attempt at sisterly communication before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Jessica's building was one of those converted warehouse spaces that attracted young professionals who wanted to live somewhere that felt urban and artistic. The lobby had exposed brick walls and industrial lighting, and the elevator was one of those old freight elevators that required you to manually close a metal gate before it would move. Jessica answered her door wearing paint-splattered jeans and a Missouri State t-shirt, looking more like the little sister I remembered from childhood than the adversary who had changed my locks. For a moment, I felt a rush of nostalgia for the relationship we used to have, before grief and financial pressure and different life choices had driven us apart. "Sarah," she said, clearly surprised to see me, "how did you get my address?" "I've always known where you live, Jess. We're sisters, remember?" She stepped aside to let me into her loft, which was spacious but sparsely furnished in a way that suggested either artistic minimalism or financial constraints. Canvases leaned against one wall, some finished paintings and others barely started. The smell of turpentine and acrylic paint filled the air. "I've been painting again," she said, following my gaze to her artwork. "It helps me think through complicated situations." "Like deciding to lock your sister out of her own home?" Jessica's expression hardened immediately. "It's not your home, Sarah. It's our parents' home, and they're gone. We need to accept reality and move forward with our lives instead of clinging to the past." "Moving forward doesn't have to mean abandoning everything that connects us to mom and dad," I said. "And even if selling the house is the right decision eventually, we should make that choice together as a family, not because you've created a crisis that forces our hand." "I tried talking to you about this," Jessica said defensively. "I've been dropping hints for months that we should think about selling, but you never wanted to discuss it seriously. You just kept acting like you were going to live there forever, like the house was yours instead of belonging to all of us." "Hints aren't the same as honest conversation," I pointed out. "If you were struggling financially, if you needed money urgently, you should have told David and me directly. We could have worked something out that didn't require selling the house immediately." "Like what? You don't have $20,000 sitting around to bail me out of my problems?" $20,000? I repeated, shocked by the amount. "Jessica, what happened? How did you get that deep in debt?" For the first time since I had arrived, Jessica looked genuinely vulnerable instead of defensive. She sank onto her futon, running her hands through her hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when she was overwhelmed. "It wasn't supposed to be this much," she said quietly. "After I lost my job, I kept thinking I'd find another one quickly, so I used credit cards to cover my expenses while I was job hunting. But the job market is terrible right now for marketing people, and freelance work doesn't pay regularly enough to cover rent and bills and everything else." "Why didn't you tell us how bad things had gotten?" "Because I was embarrassed," she admitted.
David has his perfect life in Portland with his successful career and his beautiful family. You have your stable job and your responsible reputation. I'm the Mitchell family screw up who can't even keep a job or manage her finances properly. I felt the stab of sympathy for Jessica, remembering how it felt to be the middle child, trying to find her place between David's achievements and Jessica's creativity. But sympathy didn't excuse the way she had handled this crisis. "We're family," I said gently. "We're supposed to help each other through difficult times, not shut each other out and make unilateral decisions that affect everyone. Help like how you helped by moving into the house and taking over everything after Mom died?" Jessica asked, her defensive anger returning. "You didn't ask David and me if we wanted you to become the keeper of the family shrine. You just decided that was your role and expected us to be grateful." This accusation stung, because there was some truth in it. I had moved into the house during Mom's final illness and had stayed there after her death without explicitly asking my siblings if they were comfortable with that arrangement. I had assumed they would appreciate having someone take care of the property, but I hadn't considered that Jessica might see my caretaking as presumptuous rather than helpful. "You're right that I should have discussed the living arrangements more formally," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't justify locking me out and trying to force a sale without any discussion at all." "I wasn't trying to hurt you," Jessica said, sounding exhausted. "I was just desperate and scared, and selling the house seemed like the only way to solve my problems and get us all unstuck from this situation. There might be other solutions if we work together instead of against each other," I said, pulling Patricia's letter from my purse. "I've written down some thoughts about how we could approach this more collaboratively. Will you at least read it and think about what I'm proposing?" Jessica took the letter but didn't open it immediately. "Are you going to
Sue me? She asked quietly. I don't want to, I said honestly, but I also can't let you make major decisions about our shared inheritance without including David and me in the process. If you're not willing to work with us, then I'll have to protect my legal rights. I'll read it, she promised, and I'll call David tomorrow to talk through the options. But Sarah, I need you to understand that I can't keep drowning in debt while we take months to make a decision about the house. I understand, I said, and I need you to understand that Mom and Dad's house represents more than just money to me. It's our family history, the place where we grew up together, the last tangible connection we have to them. Maybe that's exactly the problem, Jessica said softly. Maybe we're holding on to the past so tightly that we can't build our futures. I left Jessica's loft that night with more questions than answers, but also with more hope than I had felt since finding myself locked out of the Maple Street house. For the first time since this crisis began, Jessica and I had talked to each other honestly about our fears and motivations, instead of just reacting to each other's actions. The conversation had revealed that this wasn't really about locks or real estate or even money. It was about grief and family roles and different ways of coping with loss. Jessica saw the house as a trap that was keeping us stuck in painful memories, while I saw it as a sanctuary that connected us to happy ones. Neither of us was completely wrong, which made finding a solution more complicated, but also more possible. If we could find a way to address Jessica's immediate financial crisis without losing the family home forever, maybe we could preserve both our relationship and our parents' legacy. But first, Jessica had to be willing to work with David and me instead of around us. The letter I had left with her would test whether she was ready to choose collaboration over crisis creation. Everything that happened next would depend on her response. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything about how I understood the situation. I was sitting in Amanda's kitchen, drinking coffee, and checking my email before heading to work when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller identified himself as Marcus Thompson, and his voice had that particular quality that comes from years of working with his hands and solving practical problems. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling," he said. "I got your number from Mrs. Garcia, your neighbor on Maple Street. She is concerned about what's been happening with your family's house, and she thought you might need some help." I was immediately curious about why a stranger would be calling about our family situation, but also touched that Mrs. Garcia had noticed my absence and cared enough to reach out on my behalf. Helen Garcia had lived next door to my parents for almost 30 years, and she had always been the kind of neighbor who watched out for everyone on the block. "I'm a contractor," Marcus continued. "I specialize in home restoration and property maintenance. Mrs. Garcia mentioned that you've been taking excellent care of your parents' house since they passed, and that your sister has recently complicated that arrangement." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it," I said with a bitter laugh. "She changed the locks and wants to force a sale because she needs money immediately." "Mrs. Garcia thought you might benefit from getting a professional assessment of the property's condition and value before any major decisions get made. Sometimes families rush into selling houses without understanding all their options, especially when they're dealing with grief and financial pressure." The idea of a professional assessment intrigued me. Patricia Rodriguez had mentioned that documentation would be important if this situation escalated to legal action, and having an expert evaluation of the house's condition and potential could strengthen my position significantly. What would that kind of assessment involve? I'd do a complete walkthrough of the property, inside and out, looking at everything from the foundation to the roof. I'd document the current condition, identify any maintenance issues, and give you a realistic picture of what the house is worth in today's market. I'd also look at renovation potential. Sometimes older homes, like the ones in Oak Hill, can be significantly more valuable with relatively small improvements. How much would something like that cost? For Mrs. Garcia's neighbor, no charge for the initial assessment. If you decide you want a formal written report for legal or real estate purposes, that would be a separate conversation. But I've lived in Springfield my whole life, and I hate seeing families destroy themselves over property disputes when there might be solutions they haven't considered. I agreed to meet Marcus at the house that afternoon, assuming I could get Jessica to let us in for the inspection. The conversation gave me hope that maybe there were practical options I hadn't thought of, ways to address Jessica's immediate financial crisis without losing the family home forever. When I called Jessica to request access for the assessment, she was surprisingly agreeable. She had apparently spent the previous evening reading the letter I had left with her and thinking about our conversation. Her tone was less defensive than it had been the day before, but still cautious. "I'm not changing my mind about needing to sell," she said firmly, "but I'm willing to listen to alternatives if they're realistic and if they address my financial situation promptly. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to explore all our options before making irreversible decisions." Marcus Thompson turned out to be exactly the kind of person you hope to meet during a crisis. Calm, knowledgeable, and genuinely interested in helping rather than taking advantage of a difficult situation. He was probably in his mid-30s with the kind of weathered hands and alert eyes that come from years of skilled manual labor. His truck was immaculately organized with tools and equipment, and he approached the house inspection with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Jessica met us at the house, having apparently taken off from her job search to be present for the assessment. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her keys and asking Marcus multiple questions about his experience and qualifications. I realized she was probably worried that I had hired someone who would tell us what we wanted to hear rather than giving us objective information. I've been working on houses in Springfield for 15 years. I've seen every kind of family situation you can imagine, and my job is to give you facts, not to take sides in family disagreements. The inspection took almost 3 hours. Marcus crawled through the basement with a flashlight, climbed into the attic to check
Insulation and ventilation, tested windows and doors, examined the electrical panel and plumbing fixtures, and spent a long time in Dad's workshop evaluating the condition of the garage and outbuildings. Jessica and I followed him through the house like anxious students waiting for test results. Being back in the familiar rooms after 2 days of exile felt both comforting and strange. Everything looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere was different knowing that Jessica had changed the locks and was planning to sell everything I could see. "Your parents took excellent care of this place," Marcus said, as we gathered in the kitchen after he'd finished his examination. "The bones of the house are solid. Good foundation, sound roof, quality construction from when they still built houses to last. Your dad obviously knew his way around tools and maintenance." "What about problems?" Jessica asked. "There have to be things that need fixing."
Every house this age has maintenance needs, Marcus acknowledged. The furnace is older and will need replacing within the next 5 years, probably sooner if you want to improve energy efficiency. Some of the windows could use upgrading for better insulation. The kitchen and bathrooms are functional but dated. The deck needs some boards replaced and the whole thing should be restained. How much would all those improvements cost? I asked. Depends how much you want to spend and what your goals are. If you just want to address the essential maintenance issues, you're looking at maybe $8,000 to $10,000. If you want to modernize and update for maximum resale value, you could easily spend $30,000 to $40,000. Jessica's face fell at these numbers. So even if we sell it, we'd have to put money into it first to get a decent price? Not necessarily, Marcus said. You could sell it as is to someone looking for a project, but you'd take a significant price reduction. Or you could sell it to a developer who'd probably tear it down and build something bigger on the lot. The idea of someone tearing down my parents' house made my stomach clench. All those memories, all that history, reduced to a dumpster full of demolition debris so someone could build a generic McMansion that would look exactly like every other new house in every other subdivision. What do you think it's worth in current condition? I asked. Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed us comparable sales in the neighborhood from the past 6 months. Based on recent sales of similar houses in Oak Hill, I'd estimate between $160 and $180, depending on how quickly you want to sell and how much negotiating you're willing to do. And if we did the basic maintenance updates, probably $200 to $220. Maybe more if you found the right buyer who appreciated the neighborhood character and the quality of construction. Jessica was doing math in her head, and I could see her calculating her share of the proceeds under different scenarios. Even at the higher estimate, her third would be around $75,000, which would certainly solve her immediate debt problems, but wouldn't set her up for long-term financial security. There's something else you might want to consider, Marcus said, glancing between Jessica and me. This house has excellent potential for rental income if you wanted to keep it as an investment property. The location is great for young professionals who want to live somewhere with character but can't afford to buy yet. Rental property? I hadn't considered this possibility. The main floor could easily rent for $1,200 to $1,500 a month to the right tenant. If you converted the basement into a separate unit, and the layout would work well for that, you could probably get another $800 to $1,000 for the lower level. Jessica looked skeptical. That sounds complicated and expensive. The basement conversion would be a significant project, Marcus agreed. But even without that, renting the house as a single-family unit would generate enough income to cover taxes, insurance, maintenance, and still provide a profit to split among the 3 owners. But someone would still need to manage the rental, deal with tenants, handle repairs, collect rent. That's not something any of us has experience with. There are property management companies that handle all those details for a percentage of the rental income. You'd net less money each month, but you wouldn't have to deal with the day-to-day responsibilities. As Marcus packed up his equipment, I felt simultaneously hopeful and overwhelmed by the new possibilities he had presented. The rental income option could potentially give Jessica the steady money she needed while preserving the house for our family's future. But it would also mean committing to being landlords together, which required a level of cooperation and trust that felt challenging given recent events. I need time to think about all this, Jessica said as Marcus loaded his truck. It's a lot more complicated than I realized. Take whatever time you need, Marcus replied, but don't take too long. Real estate markets can change quickly, and some of these options work better during certain seasons. If you decide to move forward with renovations, spring and summer are the best times for most projects. That evening, Amanda and I sat in her living room with legal pads, calculators, and laptops, trying to work through the financial implications of the various options Marcus had presented. Amanda had always been good with numbers, and she helped me create spreadsheets comparing different scenarios. The rental income option is interesting, she said, but it assumes that Jessica would be comfortable with a long-term arrangement instead of needing immediate cash.
Maybe there's a way to structure it so she gets some money up front and some ongoing income. Like if David and I bought out part of her share initially, and then we all shared the rental profits going forward. That could work if you and David have savings available for the buyout. Do you? I had been contributing to my retirement account and had built up a modest emergency fund, but I didn't have anywhere near the kind of money that would be required to buy out a significant portion of Jessica's inheritance share. David might be in better financial shape, but he also had a young family and a mortgage in Portland. Probably not enough, I admitted, but maybe we could get a loan against the house's value to finance a partial buyout. Now you're talking about mortgaging property that's currently paid off. That adds risk in monthly payments that would reduce the rental income. The more we analyzed the numbers, the more complicated every solution became. Each option involved trade-offs and risks that would affect all three siblings differently. Jessica needed immediate relief from her debt.
Problems. David wanted minimal involvement and maximum simplicity. I wanted to preserve the house and honor our parents' memory, while also being fair to my siblings' financial interests. My phone rang while Amanda and I were deep in spreadsheet calculations. The caller ID showed David's number, and I answered, hoping he had insights that might help clarify our options. "I've been thinking about this situation all day," David said, without preamble. "I talked to Lisa about it, and we both think there has to be a solution that doesn't involve Jessica railroading us into a quick sale or you taking legal action against your own sister." Marcus Thompson suggested the rental income possibility, I told him, explaining what we had learned from the property assessment. David listened thoughtfully as I outlined the various scenarios we had been analyzing. "The rental idea makes sense financially," he said when I finished. "But I'm concerned about whether Jessica is in the right emotional and financial state to be a good partner in a rental property investment." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Sarah. She's got $20,000 in credit card debt. She's been unemployed for 2 months, she just lost her apartment lease, and she's making impulsive decisions under pressure. Those aren't the characteristics of someone who should be making long-term investment commitments." David's observation was uncomfortably accurate. Jessica's financial crisis and desperate behavior suggested someone who was overwhelmed and making poor decisions, not someone who could be trusted with the complex responsibilities of rental property ownership. "So what do you think we should do?" "I think we need to find a way to help Jessica solve her immediate problems, but maybe that means buying her out completely rather than trying to make her a long-term partner in whatever we decide to do with the house." "Can we afford to do that?" "Maybe, if we structure it creatively. What if you continued living in the house and paying rent to David and me for Jessica's share? Over time, you could buy us out entirely. Or we could convert it to the rental property option once Jessica is back on her feet financially." This possibility intrigued me because it addressed everyone's immediate needs while keeping options open for the future. Jessica would get the cash she needed to pay off her debts. David would get investment income without day-to-day involvement. I would be able to stay in the house and work toward eventually owning it entirely. "How much rent would I need to pay to make the numbers work?" I asked. "Let's say the house is worth $180,000, so Jessica's share would be $60,000. If David and I each put up $30,000 to buy her out, you'd need to pay us rent that would give us a reasonable return on that investment, plus enough to cover taxes and insurance on the property." "I'm not sure I can afford market rate rent plus enough to give you investment returns," I said honestly. "My salary's decent, but it's not unlimited." "We wouldn't need market rate returns immediately," David said. "This is family, not a business deal. We could start with rent that you can afford and adjust it over time as your income grows or as property values change." The more David explained his thinking, the more workable this solution seemed. It would require cooperation and trust among all three siblings, but it would address everyone's primary concerns without forcing anyone into unwanted compromises. "What do you think Jessica's response would be to this kind of arrangement?" I asked. "I think if we present it as a way for her to get the money she needs immediately while still keeping the house in the family, she might be more receptive than you'd expect. Her primary concern right now is solving her debt crisis. If we can do that, she might be willing to step back from ownership responsibilities she never really wanted anyway." "Should I talk to her about it?" "Let me call her first," David suggested.
Sometimes it's easier to have these conversations when there's some emotional distance involved. You and Jessica are both pretty invested in your positions right now. I might be able to present this as a practical solution rather than someone winning or losing the argument. I agreed to let David take the lead on the next conversation with Jessica. He had always been good at family diplomacy, probably because he had maintained more emotional distance from our parents' daily lives and our childhood family dynamics. Jessica might be more willing to listen to ideas that came from him rather than from me. The next day brought developments I hadn't anticipated. I was at work, trying to focus on tax preparation for one of my clients, when Jessica called me directly instead of waiting for David's call. "I've been thinking about everything Marcus said yesterday," she began, her voice more subdued than I had heard her in days. "And I realize I may have been too hasty about forcing a sale. What changed your mind?" "I drove by the house this morning and saw Mrs. Garcia working in her garden. She waved at me and asked how you were doing, and I realized that our neighbors have been watching this whole situation unfold. Mrs. Garcia told me she was worried about you having to stay somewhere else when you've been taking such good care of Mom and Dad's place." The fact that Jessica was concerned about what the neighbors thought surprised me. She had never seemed to care much about community opinion before, but maybe grief and stress had made her more sensitive to how her actions were affecting other people. "Mrs. Garcia also told me something I didn't know," she continued. "She said that Mom mentioned to her a few weeks before she died that she hoped the house would stay in our family for another generation, that she and Dad had always pictured grandchildren playing in the same backyard where we grew up." This revelation hit me hard because it aligned so perfectly with my own instincts about what our parents would have wanted. Mom had never explicitly told me about her hopes for the house's future, but knowing she had shared those thoughts with Mrs. Garcia made my attachment to the place feel validated rather than sentimental. "I still need money, Sarah," she said firmly. "That part hasn't changed. But maybe there's a way to solve my problems without losing the house entirely." "David called me yesterday with some ideas about that," I said carefully. "Would you be open to hearing alternatives to a straight sale?" "Maybe, but they'd have to be realistic alternatives that actually address my debt situation, not just ways to postpone dealing with it." We arranged to meet that afternoon at Rosie's Diner, the same place where our family had shared countless Sunday breakfasts over the years. It felt appropriate to have this conversation in a location that held good memories for all of us, a neutral space where we could focus on problem solving.
Rather than defending our positions, Jessica was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window at the downtown Springfield street scene. She looked tired and stressed, but also more open than she had seemed since this crisis began. "I owe you an apology," she said, before I could even sit down. "Changing the locks was wrong. Even if I was desperate and scared, that wasn't the right way to handle the situation." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, sliding into the booth across from her. "I understand you were under pressure, but it felt like a betrayal after everything we've been through together." "It was a betrayal," Jessica acknowledged. "I was so focused on my own problems that I didn't consider how my actions would affect you or David. That's not the kind of person I want to be." For the first time since Mom's funeral, Jessica and I were talking to each other like sisters instead of like adversaries. The defensive anger that had characterized all our recent interactions was replaced by a sadness and vulnerability that reminded me of the relationship we used to have before adult responsibilities and different life choices had driven us apart. "Tell me about David's ideas," Jessica said. I explained the buyout arrangement David had proposed, emphasizing how it could address her immediate financial needs while keeping the house available for future family use. Jessica listened thoughtfully, asking practical questions about timelines and payment structures. "How much would you and David be able to pay me for my share?" she asked. "We'd need to work out the details, but probably around $60,000 if we base it on Marcus's property assessment." "When would I get the money?" "That would depend on how quickly we could arrange financing and complete the legal paperwork. Probably within 30 to 60 days if everyone agreed to move forward." Jessica was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing her options. "$60,000 would pay off all my debts and give me enough cushion to get back on my feet properly," she said finally. "And I wouldn't have to deal with the stress of being a rental property owner when I can barely manage my own finances."
Does that mean you'd be interested in this arrangement? Maybe, but I'd want it formalized legally so everyone's interests are protected. And I'd want to make sure you and David aren't taking on more financial risk than you can handle just to bail me out of my problems. That's exactly the kind of careful thinking this situation needs, I said, feeling more hopeful than I had in days. We're family, but we're also talking about major financial decisions that could affect us all for years to come. There's something else, Jessica said hesitantly. If you end up living in the house long term, I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't get so attached to preserving everything exactly the way Mom and Dad left it that you forget to build your own life there. That house should be a foundation for your future, not a museum to their past. Jessica's concern touched me because it revealed how much she had been thinking about my well-being, not just her own financial problems. Her worry that I might get stuck in the past instead of moving toward the future was similar to concerns Amanda had expressed, and I realized it came from genuine caring rather than criticism. I promise, I said. And Jessica, I want you to promise me something too. What? Promise me that if you do get your finances straightened out from this arrangement, you won't disappear from our family. I know David lives far away, but you're here in Springfield. I'd like us to stay connected, to rebuild the relationship we used to have. I'd like that too, Jessica said softly. I've been so ashamed of my financial mess that I've been avoiding everyone, but that just made everything worse. We sat in Rosie's diner for another hour, talking through the practical details of the buyout arrangement, and also reconnecting as sisters who had lost their way during a difficult time. By the time we left, we had a tentative agreement that David would need to approve, but we also had something more valuable, a renewed sense of being family members who cared about each other's well-being. The next few days passed in a flurry of phone calls, legal consultations, and financial planning. David enthusiastically supported the buyout arrangement and agreed to split the cost with me. Patricia Rodriguez helped us draft a legal agreement that protected everyone's interests while allowing for flexibility as circumstances changed. Marcus Thompson connected us with a reliable appraiser to get an official property valuation for the legal documents, and he offered to help me plan renovation priorities if I decided to update the house gradually over time. Amanda cheered the resolution and offered to help me paint my childhood bedroom in colors that reflected my adult preferences rather than the decorating choices I had made as a teenager. But the most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Garcia
Stopped by the house while I was checking on Mom's rose garden. She had obviously been following the situation closely, and her relief at learning that the house would stay in our family was evident. "Your mother would be so pleased," she said, watching me water the roses that Mom had planted and tended for 15 years. "She worried about you children being able to stay close after she and your father were gone. This house has always been the heart of your family." "I hope I can live up to the responsibility," I said. "You already have, dear. The way you cared for your parents and the way you've handled the situation with your sister shows exactly the kind of person they raised. They'd be proud of all three of you for finding a solution that keeps the family together." 2 weeks later, we completed the legal arrangements that would allow Jessica to receive her inheritance share immediately, while giving me the opportunity to eventually own our parents' house entirely. David and I structured the payments so that Jessica received $65,000, slightly more than her third of the appraised value, while I committed to paying them rent for the next 5 years, with an option to purchase their shares at that time. The arrangement satisfied everyone's primary needs while preserving options for the future. Jessica paid off her debts, moved into a smaller apartment she could afford, and began rebuilding her financial stability with a clean slate. David received investment income from a property he trusted me to maintain properly. I gained the security of knowing I could stay in the family home while working toward full ownership. But more importantly, we had navigated a potentially family-destroying crisis and emerged with stronger relationships and better communication. Jessica and I began meeting for dinner once a week, gradually rebuilding the sisterly bond that had been strained by grief and circumstances. David made plans to visit Springfield more frequently, bringing his family to stay in the house where he had grown up.
The house on Maple Street remained the heart of our family, just as Mrs. Garcia had said it would. But it became something more than a shrine to our parents' memory. It became a foundation for our own adult relationships and a place where the next generation of Mitchells could create their own memories while staying connected to their family history. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.